Welcome back. This is the second part in a 4-part series on the Incra LS Positioner. In the last video we had a look at what was in the box, and in this video we're going to build it to this assembled state. If that's for you, stick around. Now the instructions say the first thing that we need to do is to mount the base to our table top. And on this diagram it tells you the distance from your router center on the 25-inch model and the 17-inch model to mount that. Over the page it tells you how to extend your router tabletop if you're using the Incra system, point out the holes that you need to use, and if you're not using the Incra system, the holes that you need to drill in your table. It then comes with a bag of bolts, and they're labelled up A21, and those bolts mount into the 4 holes that you drill into your table, and then this simply slides on and you bolt it from underneath. And once you've done that, your base unit is clamped on the table, and then you can use your Incra in this way. However, I don't want to do that. I don't want to drill my MFT, and I certainly don't want to drill the top of my CMS. And I also want portability. I want to be able to take it from the CMS and use it on the MFT on either end, either orientation, and give me that flexibility. We are going to mount it to the Festool Crown stop. So the idea goes, if we mount it to the crown stop, I can then use this as a portable base and put it on any of my Festool systems. Makes sense? So the first thing to realise is that these are the channels here that the supplied A21 nuts and bolts slot inside of. That then goes through your table, and then a washer and a bolt on the other side secures that to the table. Now these holes are designed to take this Festool clamping knob, and that's the clamping knob that holds on to the crown stop the extensions on our Capex. These holes are slightly narrower at the bottom than they are at the top, and I'm not sure if that's the casting or that's deliberate, but that nut there won't quite fit into the casting, and the length of this bolt that comes with it is slightly too long to secure the base to the table. So I'm just going to widen this hole out a little bit just using a drill. Now at this point you could drill a second hole in this side of the bracket, and then you could use these bolts to secure it. Now that's entirely up to you. I've purchased a second bracket here, so I'm going to dedicate my crown stop to my Incra system. If you're not going to do that and you don't like modifying these things, then you may decide you want to do something different. With that hole drilled out, I'm just going to draw a line between to find the centres between these 2 holes, and just draw a line across, and then resting that into position, I can mark where I want my second hole, which is going to be about there. And now in theory, that can slide into position, and I can clamp that up from the bottom, and that's going to be pretty good. I want to make sure that this is square to the crown stop. Now we know that the crown stop, by the way it's designed, always mounts parallel to the bench. So if I can make this square to the crown stop, then it will always be square to the MFT or the CMS. If you look at this device here, this is the actual crown stop itself that comes with the kit. Now because of the design of that, this will always be square to the crown stop. So I can now put it into place and just make sure that the Incra base is flush against that, tighten that into position. Now this is always guaranteed to be parallel to this, which is always square to the base, so therefore the entire assembly will be automatically square to any table that we mount it on. With everything paralleled up, we can now simply lock all this down, and in theory that will now give me repeatability. So if I drop this back on, lock it to the table, tighten up the knob, I shall get something that's reasonably square. And it is. So that's really cool. That gives me huge portability. I also want to make sure that this is super secure, so we can take further advantage of these channels, and we can come in with the Festool clamps, and we can clamp that into position to give it a little bit more clamping force to the base. And that's going absolutely nowhere. With this in position, the next step is to start to mount the Pro2 Fence. We've got to do a little bit of disassembly before we do that. All the fence comes packaged together inside the system. So we've got the riser rail, the fence that we're looking for, and then the super fence all bolted together. So let's take this apart and then we can get to the pieces we need. The riser is simply held on by this screw here. So we loosen that, oops, sorry, and then that will slide out of the way. So with the top riser out of the way, we now need to separate the Wonder Fence from the basic fence. It's this basic fence we're looking for as a next step to fit to the bracket, and this is known as the Pro2 Fence. If you look at the front of the Wonder Fence, you've got 1, 2, 3 holes inside there, and hiding behind those holes are 3 bolts that are connecting this to the Pro2 rail. Undoing this nut here allows you to slide this back, and then hopefully you can see inside there the 3 bolts that we're looking for. Now the 2 that we need to undo are these 2 outside ones. They're the ones that secure the Wonder Fence to the Pro2 Fence. The middle one is putting clamping pressure onto this black wedge, which allows the Wonder Fence to move forwards and backwards but still stay parallel to the Pro2 Fence, and that's useful for things like jointing operations that we'll look out down the line. In the packaging for the Wonder Fence comes this screwdriver, and what we're going to do is to undo these 2 nuts, and you access those by the holes in the front of the Wonder Fence. 1, 2, and then that will slide out. We can now come in with a rail and we can mount this rail in place. Now what I should have mentioned is that this bracket has a right way and a wrong way. If we want to use this in this direction, indeed we do, you can see on one side of the bar there's this thread. This is called the lead screw standing, and that's what the LS stands for in the Incra LS system. That engages with this bracket here, the clamping bracket. So your lead screw needs to be on the same side as your clamping bracket. So if you'd mounted this 180 degrees in the other direction, you'd be looking to fit this going away from your MFT. It's a bit tricky, but we should just be able to slide this into place, engages on that side, and that should nicely slide in and slide quite freely back and to. Now the clamp has 3 positions. It has an open position that slides back and to, so your coarse adjustments. It's then got a second position. This is now locked, but the incremental dial can be used, and then it's completely locked where everything's locked down. Put it in the locked down position for the next exercise, which is fitting this fence to the rail. In the kit we get this second bag, A07. And inside there you have 2 bolts, 2 more sliding nuts, and a couple of washers. They need to be inserted into this slot here and this slot here. And now the bar can simply slot into place. 1, 2. Then just tighten up those 2 Allen bolts at the back. Once all this is mounted and set up, we now need to see if this is square to the table, and for that we bring in a square, a rest on our table, and we're looking for any rock. And as you can see, I am slightly out of square on this fence. Now the fix for this I think is a bit clunky. What you do is you loosen off these 2 bolts that we use to tighten the fence on, and we put a shim between the end of the arm and the fence. So I want to bring the top of the fence forward, so I want to put a shim at the top. Conversely, if I wanted to bring the bottom of the fence forward, I will put a shim at the bottom. Inside the Wonder Fence bag there is this little packet of plastic things that look incredibly like shims to me and are also the right size to just fit across that fence. So I'm going to drop a couple of those in and just hold the fence back in position and see whether that's enough. And actually one shim seems to have got that. So now we'll just tighten this back into place. And my fence is now perfectly square to the MFT table. Now with this mounted, we can now go ahead and put back on our Wonder fences. So remember, we had these nuts that we undid before. They just now simply slide back into the channel. We then, obviously that's how we're going to adjust the fence, so we can just tighten this into an arbitrary position for now, and we just do that by tightening up the two outside bolts that we used before. The next job is to install the HighRise that stops the fence tipping. We're going to need a 0.9 and the two brackets that look like this. First thing, find these little dome head washers. I think they're called button head washers in the instructions. Drop a washer onto it and loosely attach it to this bracket here, which is the bracket with the two holes inside it. You now find the shorter of these black screws here. These are actually the 1/2 inch screws. The other ones are the 5/8 screws. Now once you've located those, put the washer on, put that through the hole on the base of your bracket, and then loosely attach the other end of that bracket, and repeat on the other side. We're then going to attach these brackets to this T-bar here. It's the top T-bar at the back of the Pro fence. So you don't attach them to the Wonder fence, which is what you'd think. They attach to the Pro fence. And that's simply a matter of sliding them into position. And my dome nut is here, facing the outside of the fence, and then you do exactly the same on this one here. And my dome nut is here, facing out. It then says that we want to space these 7 5/8 of an inch apart on the fence. Now, there's no metric equivalent, but we can solve that problem. Hey Siri, what's 7 5/8 of an inch in millimeters?
7.63 inches is 193.68 millimeters.
So it's around about 194 millimeters apart, which is about there. And once that's done, tighten them down. Now that's strange. The socket that came with the kit and the larger Allen key fits the larger nuts that are holding these in place, but it doesn't fit the dome headed ones. There's a smaller Allen key that comes with the kit, and that also doesn't fit. So there's actually no Allen key that I can find, unless I'm going completely insane, that fits and works inside those dome nuts. However, the Festool 4mm that came with some tool or other does fit. So it looks like you need a 4mm hex wrench or Allen key to tighten down those outside nuts. That seems a bit strange, so I probably missed something somewhere, but still, you've got to tighten those down, and once they're tightened into position, that part of the exercise is complete. Once that's done, we're now looking for this packet here, and this is packet A10. Inside kit A10 we get these two angled brackets and some more 1/2 inch socket headed screws and some more of the captive nuts and the washers. Now according to the kit, they simply slot onto the back underneath here, and I assume that's giving that bracket a little bit of support. What's interesting is that the diagram is showing that the brackets, these angled brackets here, is showing we have a small hole at the back of them there, and on mine there's no hole. And also on the angle brackets there's a hole at the bottom and a slot, and according to the instructions these go into there and slot on and are tightened to this back here. So I'm not sure whether we need these holes or not, and we'll find out, won't we, as we go through. So job, put the bracket on, slide the bracket up, and then tighten that into place. There's two black bars in the kit. There's a long one and there's a small one, and you can see it's got a T-bar in the end. This is known as the cap extender, and you can see what's going to happen. That's going to fit onto those rails, and this one's going to fit there, sliding backwards and forwards to allow us to accept a variety of different materials. Take your Phillips screw, and there's two sets of nuts inside this. There's obviously the captive nuts and the standard ones. These are the standard ones that we're going to use. And then this slots into position. Make sure that's flush to the ends. Wow, our measurement was good when we did that conversion. And now we can screw this down with an appropriate screwdriver. Captive nut. And now we just want to make sure that this is in line with the fence. And tighten that down. So that's the top rail fitted. In the kit A09 I had a number of pieces left over. That came as part of the packaging for this, but I've still got these left over. And I can't find a use for those discussed in the manual, and there's nowhere obvious that they would go. So we'll put those on one side just to make sure we don't lose them. The next job is we're going to fit the shop stop. This is a device that runs across and just gives you a reference point when you're using this in router mode to stop the material going too far. We start by undoing these two white knobs on the device, and that just releases that stop there. Release this bar here, and this bar is just obviously another stop bar, and we can put that just out of the way for the time being and tighten it down. This is going to fit on top here, and this piece slides up and down to give us another stop reference. So that simply slides onto that nut there, and then it's tightened into position by using the screw on this end. Happy days. To fit it, release these white knobs so they slide out of the way. It runs on this top rail with the red sawtooth piece on the back, so it goes in that orientation. And then it's a simple matter of sliding that into the position. It locks 1mm increments using those sawtooth on the back, and you can lock that in position. And we'll look at that more when we start to look at the router setup. And the final job is we now need to drop the right angle bracket onto here. That's not discussed in these instructions. Inside the right angle kit itself, however, you do get these instructions here, a smaller leaflet. Page 1, it covers a little bit about the safety. The middle two pages then walk us through how to assemble it, and then the final pages talks a little bit about the operation. The parts we're going to need are the angle fixture bracket, the faceplate, and a bag of bits labelled E02 that came with the kit. The first job is to mount the angle fixture base onto the faceplate. Look at the faceplate. You've got this side with the two T-tracks on it, and then you've got the side with multiple T-tracks on it. We're going to work with the side with the two T-tracks on it, and the faceplate is going to mount like this onto that right angled bracket. That mounts with these 4 long screws and these rectangular nuts. So we drop the 4 bolts into those slots as shown. Turn that over, and now we can just attach the rectangular nuts loosely onto those bolts. With that in place, we can now slot this into the T-slots. We now make sure that this edge here is flush with this edge here. and then we can just tighten that into position with an appropriate tightening device. In the kit you also get these 2 plywood runners. They sit on the base here like this, and that just rests onto the table, running up and down the table as you adjust your right angle fence. And obviously they're sacrificial, so if your router bit should catch these, you're going to damage these, not the metal fence, and not your router bit. They attach quite simply, once again, using the T-rail, a washer on one end, into the countersunked hole, and then we just put a nut on the back. Then that simply slots into the T-rail. Now, according to the instructions, you don't want to take it all the way down. You want to leave that set back a little bit, and it's advising about ½ an inch, which is about there. And then you simply tighten that down into position. So now your assembly should look something like this. The final piece, we're going to mount these small nylon screws into the threaded holes on this device. The 2 end ones also get a nylon nut. So put the nut onto the nylon screw or the nylon bolt, and then just screw that loosely into place. And then the one without the nut goes in the center hole. This then slots onto the fence like that, and you can see how that then works moving up and down on the fence. The 2 nylon nuts that we put on the outside, you now tighten down to take any play out of this device, and that just locks in position, and you should end up with this square to this, and it should run relatively smoothly. The Wonder Fence also comes with dust extraction. There's a cap on the far end that seals this off, and then we put an extraction port onto this end. It's a 2-part kit, a plastic adapter with a metal plate on it. There are 2 holes down here, and that just takes these screws. It recommends you use a drill driver for this, because it will self-tap, so we just carefully put that into position, and then this simply slots into that hole, and then that gives you dust extraction facilities. There it is, assembled. The great thing about using the crown stop is we can now move that to any position on the MFT table, also move it to the CMS, and it will always line up, and it will always be square, and it will always be parallel, and I've got adjustability down to 0.05 millimeters. The next video, we're going to use it on the MFT table and show how versatile it is in practice. See you next time.